Here, I'll get you a name
Probably
tag.
shouldn't be so close to the middle, guys.
Your name tag's coming also. No, your name tag's coming also. I'll be right back.
Is Hilda here? Really? Oh, there she is. I didn't see her.
Let me go get some more name tags here. Sorry, someone told me they're coming, but they know you're coming.
I can go back.
All right. I don't feel right sitting in the middle like this. I'm not accustomed to such fine treatment.
You know what? It doesn't
Your
look
daughter
like
doing
all
well?
boys and all
She's
girls.
doing okay.
Want me to switch with you?
Yeah.
Doing okay. She's a buggy box. Long time no see. How you been? Glad you're here. Thanks for joining us.
This is a lunch meeting. We get no food.
We get food.
We do. After. We have to serve first.
We got to sing for or something.
Thank you.
How are you? Nice to see you.
We got to wait for Yvonne.
Oh, no, she's not coming.
Oh,
She's
then
ill.
Yvonne.
Yeah. So Yvonne is not well, so
All
you
right.
can.
So Judge Poe's not coming.
She's not
Okay.
You got me instead of her.
That's okay.
You didn't make a very good trade, but
I say it's not great. All right, everybody have water.
I didn't know you were going to be here.
I didn't know I was going to be here either.
It's just random? Okay.
I just saw the email yesterday and I called and they said, yes, come on. I said I would just show up.
I'll email you guys, spell us name.
I like these events. Kind of depends on if you have a hot room or not. Sometimes I've been to this one maybe 3 times, and sometimes the students want to ask no questions, and sometimes somebody starts the question answer period and they really take off. So.
Things are pretty hot at the court right now.
Things are pretty hot.
Speaking of hot,
Just stay away from the news.
Note to self, don't give in.
No, note to self, don't give interviews. Yeah. I can't remember the joke about the defense attorney who talks about the fish on the wall with the mouth open.
tell me the joke.
were we ever that young?
That's what I'm saying. It has something. A defense
it's
attorney
amazing.
is talking about talking to their client and making a reference to the fish that they have on the wall. And
It's 45 years since I graduated.
I'm not saying the punchline right, but how did you catch it? And you'd say, well, it opened its mouth. Meaning, shut up.
You know, when I was in D.C. for
The
my
last couple of years,
the Justice Department was said,
all of a sudden I
we can't say
physically
about the part of the
feel
press, but this is what is happening to you.
I spent a lot more time with doctors and
Hearing.
consumers
One
than I
woman
ever thought of.
said, was quoted in the paper saying, it wasn't as bad as I
I'm
thought.
getting another
Guess
book
what? They
out
brought
of
her
prayer
back.
by heart.
Oh my gosh, really?
So I told my family, no, talk to the press. The morning after my hearing,
Now you start looking at the
there's an
barcode, and
article,
the first thing you look at is the
and my
obituary.
brother Manuel was quoted. He's got his age and and this was when Monica Lewinsky grand jury was meeting, and I was just so nervous after waiting for 3 years, like that something could happen to derail me, and I mean it wouldn't have taken much, and so I got so furious at my brother, and he was mortified. He said, "What did you have?" I was like,
You can tell it's not interview season.
I mean, at his age, where he worked, I think, and all he was saying was something benign, but still, when we were in the
At least a more diverse group than you normally see with the bar. So
Yeah, I am so happy that I never had to go through anything even close to that. And they, for us, they go back 15 years, so no interviews of college roommates or first girlfriends or anything like that.
$12.
But for you all, it is just so probing. The only people that can be a judge now are. Oh. Hi, Peter Gray. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Dean. Thanks for letting us do
See you again. Andy Hayner.
I was, obviously Margie Myers was talking about one of her friends who was during the Obama administration. She was in the running, and she answered the question about. I'm not, a proponent of drug use, but she answered honestly that she had used drugs when she was in college. She was in college in the late 80s and early 90s, and there was a lot of that. And so, it's hard for me to imagine that people who came of age in the late 80s and early 90s didn't have something like that going on.
So the last question on the White House question was, is there anything in your background that would be embarrassing?
Okay, and
That was
my plan is to sort of ask
given
questions,
what was revealed
moderate
afterwards.
variations of questions, like make it work.
Nope.
Take some questions from the students afterwards.
He's
We'll
fine.
Lunch is you all.
No, I'm fine. If he's fine, then I'm happy.
Yeah, like let's just move the meter a little bit.
I'm sorry? Exactly. We have tables in the atrium. We'll try to put one judge per table.
Okay, good.
Have your clerks scatter about. That would kind of some good conversations. And by the way, this is a very good turnout. This is the most I've seen.
Any word on the progress of
Quite happy.
Judge Kazin through the process?
No, I figured he would be up. Nobody said a word to me about it, but so he's a nominee.
You're
Yeah.
busy.
Has he had his hearing?
Also,
I talk to him a lot, but I don't want to
any
ask.
objections to recording?
I think they're pushing very much. I think they're just going to.
Any objections to recording this?
No, as long as I know it.
I'm telling you.
Is it a rumor? I love to try to find out information. I won't spread it, but is Nadia in the running for your spot? Or
No.
I don't know who's moving where or anything,
Well,
but
it's Nadia.
Nadia Madrano, I'm sorry. Magistrate
Is she
judge.
the new magistrate judge
She's
somewhere?
been from
McAllen?
McAllen, I thought.
Yeah. Okay, I've met her, but I didn't remember her name.
It's okay.
No, I took some use out in 2011. I forget who it was who took my slot. Oh, yeah. Rolando Olvera.
Yeah, but then there was, I can't keep track of where spots
Micaela
moved.
Alvarez, maybe is what the slot that she might
When
be.
did you take senior status?
2011. But I
Wow. Okay.
But I kept helping out until 2020.
Good
Okay, maybe
afternoon.
that's why I'm confusing the two.
That was impressive. He speaks and you, wow,
It happens.
that's power. I'm very impressed because Professor Blackman's hair is back today and it's
It's early.
totally controlled. Good day, welcome to, you have spent many, many hours studying opinions. These are the folks who write those opinions that have created such consternation for you in all of your classmates. This is a great opportunity. We are just thrilled to have such a panel of judges here today. And the reason we do this is because it is so important to understand how to interact with members of the judiciary and the benefits of working with them. My first two jobs after law school were as a clerk, first for a district court and then on an appellate court. And when you work with a judge, you have the ability to understand and to learn what goes into the judicial process, what people do and their advocates that can be successful, and what they do that is absolutely infuriating to judges and creates problems for them and for their clients. You learn that the judges are real people who are committed to doing a good job, to reaching a resolution that is just and fair and complete under the law. And you have an understanding of how important it is that we have an unbiased judiciary, a judiciary that is committed to this rule of law. Without the judiciary doing what they do, in an effective way, our democracy is at risk. And these are the individuals who stand in the way to make sure that we do what is right. This is an opportunity for you to learn not only how to interact with judges when you are an advocate, but also the value of working with a judge while you are in law school or after law school, to see how the process works and how you can be a more effective advocate for your client. I'm thrilled to see so many people here. I greatly appreciate you taking the time to come spend time with our students here at South Texas, and I'll turn it over to Professor Black. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is one of my favorite events every year because we bring the pillars of our legal community to our law school, and you get to talk to them. So the format for this will be I will ask some questions, the judges will give their answers, then we'll take questions from you all, and after comes the fun part. You'll notice there are tables in the atrium and box lunches. We will all scatter to the tables. Judges and their law clerks are here. Thank you, law clerks. And you'll have a chance to talk to them and use this time wisely, not just for free food, but also to learn about the judges and how they go about their jobs. So I want to hit on three primary topics: law school, practice, and your time on the bench. And I want to try to give all of you sort of the full range of how these distinguished jurists came to be where they are. They didn't just wake up one day and become federal judges. That didn't just happen. A lot of things had to happen going into it. So I'll start with just going down the line, Judge Haanen. When you were in law school, right, did you ever think that you might become a judge one day? Did that thought ever cross your mind?
Not really. I thought about becoming a judge because after I got out of law school, I clerked for a judge, as many of my colleagues here will tell you, and had a very strong relationship with him, and it got me thinking that way. And then when I got out in private practice, you know, every time you were in front of a good judge, you appreciated it, and every time you were in front of a bad judge, you hated it. And so at some point, you start thinking, well, you know, I could do this a lot better than they're doing it. And that's kind of the impetus, both the prior experience with the judge and having been out and seeing what a difference a good judge can make, at least hopefully make a difference.
I'll come back and ask later what a bad judge is, not right now. So my question for Judge Ellison is, at what point did you first realize that becoming a federal judge might be something that you might want to do as a career?
At age 10. When I was 10 years old, I was living in New Orleans, where I was born and did most of my growing up. And it was that year that the federal government decided finally he was going to integrate the public schools of New Orleans. And that was such a major event because it was fundamentally important news, but also because it impinged on how I conducted my daily life. It looked like New Orleans was going to close the schools like Little Rock closed its schools to avoid integration. But one judge, J. Skelly Wright, a district judge in New Orleans, oversaw the integration, and he had hell to pay. He was hanged in effigy on the floor of the Louisiana legislature. He had a cross burned in front of his in front of his house. On his way to work one morning, men tried to push him into onrushing traffic. He had marshals living in his home for months. But at the end of the day, federal law prevailed, and the schools were integrated. And his example was so stunning to me that I decided anybody could do that much good had a job that I wanted. Now, there's a lot that's wrong with that picture. There's a lot that's wrong with that picture. One person's will overrode a majority sentiment. But that's the nature of federal review. And if you disagree with that, then you disagree with our entire superstructure of Article III courts.
Judge Rosenthal, same question. When did you first realize you wanted to be a federal judge?
I think I was 12, not
12?
10.
Oh, my
Keith was
goodness.
way ahead of me. But it was a little bit similar that Keith and I both grew up at a time when the civil rights movement was at its most passionate, and when the impact it had on the public life and public consciousness and civic discourse was intense. And that had an effect. And then I went to a college that had a wonderful program on philosophy of law. So I studied that thinking I was going to become a wonderful philosopher. That was way too hard. Being a judge is much easier. And in law school, it was like every one of you, spend a lot of your time reading opinions, mostly of appellate judges. I suspect that you don't read as many opinions by district judges. It's a beef that many of us have with the academy.
You should. We read Judge Haynen's opinion sometimes.
But yes, then I went and clerked for a judge, and then I went into practice. And like Judge Haynen, I was impressed over and over again with how much a good judge made things better and how much a bad judge made things worse. And like Judge Haynen, seeing enough bad judges is like going into a courtroom and watching bad lawyers. It's a boost of confidence because you realize that you could do that at least as well and often better than the people you're watching. So seeing good judges, seeing bad judges, working for a judge who was a good judge, and like Keith, believing that there was an opportunity to wake up in the morning and not have to look at yourself in the mirror and think, why am I going to work today? That's not a problem for us.
Good. And Judge Bray, the same question to you, and also maybe discuss a little bit the magistrate process a little bit different. How did you decide that's a career path you want to pursue?
Well, backing up slightly, I went to engineering school and worked in industry, for lack of a better word, for maybe 5 or 6 years after I graduated from college, and didn't even imagine going to law school until I was embroiled in a number of labor relations type of disputes as one of the members of management, and it was suggested to me repeatedly that you're wasting your time here, you should just go to law school. And that got me thinking about it. It certainly wasn't a thought that I will go to law school to be a judge. I thought I was going to be an intellectual property lawyer because I had an engineering degree, and those two things just seemed to flow one from the next. And I could regale you with, maybe at the table I'll tell you all about it, but yada, 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 I found myself in the position of being an assistant federal public defender and trying criminal cases, and then was ultimately the chief of the trial section in Houston. Very, very happy with that, and also did not ever imagine that anybody would consider me as an Article III judge for a lot of reasons. And I also had no interest in being a judge on the state side. And then all of a sudden, many of the magistrate judges reached this point where they were retiring and there were openings. And I appeared in front of magistrate judges thousands of times, and I don't exaggerate that, thousands of appearances, and loved what they did. And a magistrate judge in the federal system is a judge who is not appointed by the president, not confirmed by Congress, but is appointed by these judges here that sit at the table. I hope they all voted for me. But more of them did than didn't, which was enough. And we can also talk about that process. But it's an Article I judge, not an Article III judge. We do ultimately many, if not most, of the very same things that district judges do, but we're referred to as magistrate judges. And that was a path that I thought I really could do this because I don't need to have any kind of political connection. In fact, it is not political. They're not even allowed to ask me about my politics. And I think it would be fun for you to try to guess what they might be. And nobody really knows that. And so it really was a good fit for me because I'm just not a political person, and they form a merit selection panel, and they interview hundreds of people, and they interview a bunch, and then the judges interview a smaller bunch, and They choose you, and I've been there for 5 years, but it wasn't until those judges started retiring and I started realizing, wait a minute, I think I can do that. And I really want to do that. It went from 0 to 60 in about a 1 year period for me.
Very good. And Judge Tagle, I welcome your question the same, and also you were an elected judge also. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that process of going to the elected bench.
Oh, this is a vintage campaign button from when I had my first contested race in 1990. I had a second contested race the following election cycle where I defeated an incumbent district judge. But you know, my beginnings are so different from my colleagues. I was a bookworm when I was young, never an outgoing person who exuded confidence. I was a beautician at age 16. I was licensed beautician at 16. But really, all I ever wanted was to get a college education. I wanted it so bad I could taste it. But I didn't know about financial aid. I didn't know about selecting a major. I didn't know anything. So when I went to school at Del Mar College in Corpus Christi, I was a blank slate, and I took all my basic courses, and I finally had to choose a major when I transferred to East Texas State University. Still having no idea of what I should do, I thought, well, I like to read, maybe I'll be a librarian. Well, I finished my degree in library science at East Texas State. Then I learned that because it was not accredited by the American Library Association, I couldn't get a job as what's called a professional librarian. So that's when I went to North Texas State and I got my master's in library science. And then I worked as a librarian for 4 years here in Houston at Strake Jesuit, but I realized it wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. And you know, understand that before even college, all I wanted, I couldn't figure out how to, I never thought, how am I going to reconcile it? I wanted to be a mother with 5 kids like my mother. So I wasn't sure how that was going to work. I never thought about, okay, how do you achieve all of that? But when I realized that library science or being a librarian wasn't for me, I decided to try law school as an experiment, if you can believe it, just to see if I could cut it. And so I was very fortunate to be admitted to the University of Texas at Austin, the law school there. And I was telling Alejandro earlier that there were so many times that I wanted to quit because I went in my declaration of intent to study law. I didn't even know a lawyer to put down there. You have to put down names of 2 lawyers. I didn't know 2 lawyers who I could put down. And so there was so much stress. My mother was in bad health, and I really wanted to quit every day until one of my colleagues who was ahead of me said, if you quit, they're going to say, look what happens. We give them a chance and they drop out. So with that on my shoulders, I decided I better stick it out. And being a judge it was not even in my frame of reference. But I was fortunate enough to be a prosecutor in the 148th District Court when I was, after I finished law school. And I learned from Judge Noah Kennedy, judge of the 148th, how to be a good judge, how to control the courtroom without being a despot, without being arrogant, and just to treat people with respect. And so much so that when I finally had a hearing after waiting for 3 years after nomination, one of the follow-up questions by one of the senators on the Senate Judiciary Committee was, who is your favorite judge, or what judge do you look up to? I think they probably were thinking that I would say some kind of Supreme Court justice. But I said no, it was just Noah Kennedy, because he taught me how to be in control of a courtroom and do things fairly and treat people with respect. So that's, I think, without realizing it, he was maybe a reason that I wanted to become a judge, because I wanted to see what that was, whether I could do something like that too.
Thank you all, very touching. And so we all started in different spaces. We ended up in the same court, which is very special. My next question will be about clerking. I think, did all of you clerk at one point, or maybe not just talk, but maybe talk about your clerkship experience and how that sort of informed your view of the law and prepared you for practice?
Well, I clerked for the Supreme Court of Texas, and the first thing you learn as a Supreme Court of Texas clerk is that it's not the Texas Supreme Court, it's the Supreme Court of Texas. And I clerked for Chief Justice Greenhill, who, up until Nathan Heck surpassed him here recently, was the longest sitting judge. And he was just a wonderful person. Clerking was for him was a great experience. It was an interesting time because at the time the legislature was in session and the bar was about to sunset and go out of business, in other words. And so there was, and of course the Supreme Court is right next to the legislature there in Austin. And so there were a lot of political things going on with the bar that he, by necessity as Chief Justice, had to be involved in. And so it was an interesting thing, and it was an interesting experience, and I highly recommend it to anyone. Some cases he'd have a strong opinion about. We would always draft the first draft of his opinions, and he would come in and say, here's what I want you to write. Some cases he didn't. You know, one of my very first cases that I wrote the first draft of for him, you know, I said, I want you to write this, and I said, which way? And he said, the right way. And so it's interesting. There were some occasions where I can remember at least one case where I wrote it one way, and he didn't like the result, and he said, go back and write it the other way, and I went and wrote it the other way, and then he looked at that, and he goes, both of these results are bad. And I said, yes, sir, they are. And he ended up going with the initial one, but when he presented it at the conference with the other judges, he said, if anybody wants to dissent, I've already written it. And that was one of the nice things about working at the Supreme Court of Texas is, you know, the clerks go to conference with them. And so there's a big conference table, and your judge and all 9 judges sit around it, and, you know, all of us little clerks would sit behind them perched, and, you know, it would get to one case that you'd worked on, and Judge Greenhill would say, all right, Andy, present the facts of this, and you'd get up and basically recite to all 9 judges, and they would ask you questions a lot of times just like you were in an oral argument, so it was kind of good training, and that's a very unusual experience because most courts don't allow their clerks to do that. So if anybody, I would prefer you clerk for the Southern District of Texas, but if you aren't thinking about doing that, you might think about clerking for the Supreme Court of Texas.
Or the other Supreme Court, right, Judge Ellison?
Sorry? Another Supreme Court?
The other one.
I graduated from law school in 1976. By then, my original judicial hero, Skelly Wright, was on the D.C. Circuit. So I clerked for him there, and then I clerked for Justice Blackmun on the Supreme Court. My first case out of law school, the first one I worked on with Judge Wright, was a Watergate conspiracy case. It's entitled United States versus Halderman, Ehrlichman, Mitchell, and others. And that, of course, was unforgettable as a piece of American history. When I was on the Supreme Court.
That's Watergate for you guys. If you don't, you're too young to recognize the names. It's Watergate.
And no relation to the other Justice Blackmun. No relation to me.
Then I clerked on the Supreme Court for Justice Blackmun, and the big case I worked on that year has just been done away with. Bakke was our show stealer that year, and of course it's just been overruled. But I don't think you want to hear war stories about my clerkships. Let me just say about clerkships, I think I generally agree with Andy that clerkships are a good thing, but I wouldn't set out to get a clerkship at all costs. there are some really bad judges to work for. And it not only...
You heard it here.
Not only will your year be unpleasant, it'll be a negative thing to have on your resume. Now, the way to find out about who's a good judge to clerk for and who's not is talking to people who've clerked previously. Now, if you run into a judge about whom his own clerks or her own clerks speak negatively, then you want to run from that the way the devil runs from holy water. Because when they're dissing their own judge, they're dissing their own credentials. So that means it really was not a good experience. But most clerks will not speak ill of their own bosses. So the way you find out is you talk to clerks who are in the same building as that judge, or if not in the same building, at least in the same judicial district, and you'll hear something closer to the truth than you'll get from the judge's own clerks. There are other good ways to spend the first years out of law school. There really are. Public interest work, foreign travel, foreign fellowships. I'm glad I clerked. I regret nothing about it, but I wouldn't let that be the alpha and the omega of your career choices.
Judge Rosenthal, for a good clerking experience, what about you?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the sunny side of the street.
Yeah.
I clerked for the judge who at the time was the chief judge of the Fifth Circuit. And it was during the late 70s. It was a great time to be in law, and I learned a huge amount from the experience of clerking on the court in those years. I also learned that being a good judge is more than simply writing opinions that law students will have to spend time trying to figure out what the judge meant. Being a good judge is managing a docket, a caseload, or in the case of being a chief judge, other judges if you can. And that was a great insight, the insight that being able to manage cases shape the process of deciding in addition to the substantive decision was something that helped me not only as a judge, but also as a lawyer. That the lawyer who can shape the process by which a case unfolds and is developed is a lawyer who controls. And that's what you all want to be able to do as litigants in a trial practice. You want to be able to have control over how the case proceeds. So that was a great insight. And the relationships among the clerks, they are precious. You spend a year spending more time with your fellow clerks than you do with anybody who is the parent of your children or anything like that. It's a very close working relationship, and it's often a very long-lasting relationship. And that also has influenced the way I've tried to involve my clerks in the work and relate to my clerks. Having clerks is the best thing about being a judge. So, yes, Judge Ellison is absolutely right. It is not the be-all and the end-all. But it is valuable at any level of the judiciary that you can clerk for, state or federal or local. Mm-hmm. And the best way to find out the best judges for a good clerkship experience are not only former clerks, but lawyers who practice in those judges' courts. How do those judges treat people? How efficient are they? How thoughtful are they? What kind of experience do the lawyers have? That's often a good predictor for the experience that the clerks will have.
Yeah, let me transition, because time flies from us quickly, to Judge Bray. When you're looking for a clerk, what are some of the things you think about? I mean, they all have sterling credentials. They can all write well. They can all have good recommendations. What is it that sort of stands out when you're trying to find someone to be a law clerk?
Well, and just to give a brief background before I directly answer the question, my clerkship was for a U.S. District Judge Sim Lake. So you've heard from somebody who clerked for the highest state court, somebody who clerked for the highest court, somebody clerked for the Fifth Circuit, and I clerked for Sim Lake. So you've got four at least so far, perspectives on different types of clerkships. They are very different. And I promise I'll answer the question. There is a place in the world where your clerkship might not be pleasant. And for the most part, I would say that is because you were checking a box. And I think that partially talks about what Judge Ellison is talking about. You don't have to do it, and certainly don't do it if what you want is to get it and then get through it. Mm-hmm. Take a clerkship because you want to do it, because you want to work with a judge, for better or for worse. Some of us are smarter than others. That's just math. Some of us are more pleasant than others. That's just math. There's a huge generation gap between judges and law clerks. It just is what it is. Most judges that I know are very different behind the bench than they are in court. Some judges who are very austere in court are, downright goofy behind the scenes, and vice versa. I'm not sure what my law clerks think of me, but I know this. And this gets to what am I looking for? I've had law clerks who came because they wanted to do the work, because they were interested. I'm telling you, you don't know what case you're going to work on in any court. Your first case might be a Title VII discrimination case, or it might be a patent litigation, or it might be a Social Security case, or one of my first law clerks, his first case was a food stamps denial appeal, a food stamps case. Who thinks you're going to work on a food stamps case? But you know what? They got it, and they enjoyed it, and they said, this is law. And then you move on and you do some other case that's very different from that next case. And at the end of 1 year or 2 years, hopefully you come out realizing that there are these incredibly interesting commonalities, these threads that bake themselves throughout the law. And by having worked on a number of different cases, you become this, very junior, but a generalist who can then go to a law firm, pick up a file, talk to lawyers like a lawyer. And so what I'm looking for in a law clerk is somebody who obviously has the basic ability, right? The basic grades and all that, but truly they've got to be interested. They've got to come to work because they want to do it and because it's fun. And I definitely have had law clerks who it's been a struggle because I got the impression very quickly that all they wanted was to say, I clerked for a federal judge, now I'm done. Well, that's a long year. Mm-hmm. If that's what you're planning on, that's a very long and painful year, and it's painful for everybody, and the judge is thinking, what are we doing? I thought you wanted to be here. On the other hand, so now when I interview, I just want people who are just interested, who can get excited about everything from gardening to soccer to, Title VII. And if you're an interested, inquisitive person, you probably will enjoy your clerkship with any judge that will choose you or that you choose.
And Judge Tockley, the question, so I don't think you were a law clerk. You
No.
tell us your
And I
story.
want to speak to those of you
That's
who
what
will
exactly
not
I asked you.
clerk, possibly, but also I wanted to touch on the chemistry that it really is. It's like dating. You've got these wonderful resumes, these great writing samples, and it doesn't work out. It happened to me once where I had two law clerks throughout the years. I went on the federal bench in '98, and I took senior status in 2011, but I kept a docket, so I had law clerks working for me till 2021 when I gave up whatever few cases I had. I helped out in Laredo and in Corpus Christi. But the fact is that two law clerks, I had always asked for a 2-year commitment. Two of those law clerks asked to be released after the first year. I knew one law clerk did not intend to stay. This was in Brownsville. It was, he was from Chicago. I learned that he didn't have any furniture in his apartment. He was sleeping. His mattress was on the floor. He didn't even have a TV set. I thought, this guy's not going to last. And sure enough, he asked to be released. And of course, I was going to release him. And then another young woman who was from New York you know, she asked to be released, and of course I'm not gonna keep somebody who doesn't wanna be there. I know it's a you know, Brownsville was a culture shock for most people. It was a culture shock for me, and I'm a Mexican-American, you know, I can imagine somebody from New York and and that's not to say that it's not possible to, you know, blend in or to have a wonderful experience, but be that as it may, the one law clerk I had to let go because, you know, one of the things that I looked for was somebody who I did not have to micromanage, somebody who was organized, who took responsibility for their caseload, where I wasn't having to stand over them to make sure that their work got done, you know? And this young man, regrettably, oh my gosh, it was really difficult. He'd been clerking for me for 2 months, and I just was having to be like right on him, and I'm thinking, you know, why am I having, I don't need a law clerk if I'm having to do the work myself. You know, I just was not willing to trust that he would give me something and then he had missed something. So in any event, I made the hard decision to let him go, and you know, I realized that it was better to you know, do it now rather than have regrets. By that time, it was a 1-year clerkship, but I just didn't want to have it. I knew it would get harder with time to let him go, and you know, but I just had to do it because I owed it to the public to make sure that the person who was clerking for me was bringing the best possible solution to the very messy situation that we are sometimes handed. So so back to what I started to say, it's I didn't clerk, but I did learn that in my experience of hiring that, you know, it's really, for me, it was chemistry. A lot of times it was just assessment of how they presented themselves, and I would look at their hobbies. You know, to me that was kind of interesting too. Somebody who was well-rounded, and you know, I would have somebody to talk to about this particular area that they did, that they had hobbies in or they had interest in. It was a very enjoyable experience for me. You know, I've heard many clerks say, former law clerks say that being a clerk was the best job they ever had, and I really think it's wonderful if that's the path you choose, but it's not the end of the world if it's not. Just, you know, I'm a prime example of that. Thank you.
Judge Ellison, do you have a comment about that?
A couple points. I generally agree with what's been said by my colleagues here. One caution I would introduce is that I can think of judges, including judges with whom I've served, who are very good judges, but lousy bosses. You want to make sure that you understand both aspects of a judicial relationship. And I've seen judges who are very, very good judges and very bad bosses, and very bad bosses and very good judges. It works. Sometimes some people are awful in the courtroom, but wonderful to work for. So you need to understand that. Secondly, there's an issue of whether you would ever want to clerk for a judge whose philosophical approach was wildly different from your own. There are two schools of thought about that. Justice Scalia, when he was early in his tenure, would solicit clerks who looked at life differently from the way he looked at it. He didn't maintain that policy, and I never talked to him about why. But my own take is, if you feel passionately that the death penalty is wrong, you're probably better off not clerking for a judge who thinks it's right. I think it's an uncomfortable relationship. I can think of counterexamples where it has worked out, but you need to ask yourself whether it work out for you if you're clerking with somebody whom you disagree with that strongly.
Well, speaking of bad judges, I want to come back to Judge Hainan.
Thank you.
And you, and you
I
mentioned.
love the way you phrased that.
I like it. And you mentioned that when you were in practice, you saw some good judges and you saw some bad judges. Maybe you can speak for a minute. What is a bad judge? I mean, these will be practicing lawyers in a year or two. What should we be looking out for the bad judges?
Well, I mean, there are judges that don't know the law, that aren't interested in knowing what the law is, and if somebody actually could explain it to them, they wouldn't follow it anyway. So that's the first, you know, they don't listen, they don't care, and unfortunately we have more of those in Texas than I'd like to think we do, but.
And as a lawyer, how do you handle it when you did your best prep for a case and you go to the bench and you realize the judge has just not a clue what's going on?
It's not easy. I mean, I've had a case where I was picking a jury and the other side objected to my question to the jury, and we both looked back and the judge was asleep. And he looked at me and I looked at him and I said, "It's your objection, I'm not waking him up." But, you know, you have to just, you have to take baby steps with them, and you know, sometimes you can bring them around. Now, of course, as an advocate, it's a lot different because you wanted to bring them around to your side. But, and then sometimes, you know, it's you're banging your head against a wall. It's never going to change. He's always, or she's always going to think this way, and you can give them 10 Supreme Court cases, and they're never going to change their mind.
All right. Judge, I was going to pivot also. I'll let you answer the question. So from bad judges to bad lawyering. So think down the line, what's the bad lawyering that you see? But Judge Ellison, go ahead.
I was going to make a different point. Let somebody else answer that question.
So Judge Rosenthal, so bad lawyering. What should all of our lovely students not do in a year or two when they graduate? What's the bad stuff?
Number 1, be prepared. Number 2, be prepared. Number 3, be really prepared. A bad lawyer is someone, first and foremost, someone who is simply not knowledgeable about either the facts that are the heart and soul of what we have to be grappling with, or the law, which is, if it's not the heart, it's the soul. You get the picture. You have to know what you're talking about. You have to have a command of what the case is about. And I can't tell you how frustrating it is. Even in the most simple Rule 16 initial pretrial conference, when I ask the question in a personal injury case, say, slip and fall. What are the damages? What kind of injuries? How old is the plaintiff? And there's this deer in the headlights response as the person is frantically pulling up the screen to open the file to figure out what the case that he is representing the client in is about, and the most basic details about that case. You don't want to be that lawyer, ever. So it's being prepared, and it is also having common sense, good judgment, and civility. No judge appreciates snarkiness, which is my omnibus term for you're being a jerk. Even if the other side's being a jerk, that doesn't justify your being a jerk. The exchange that basically boils down to, well, he started it or she started it, doesn't play any better now than it did when you were 8 years old on the playground. So be polite, be prepared, be kind. It is ridiculous not to agree to things like accommodations for scheduling, for family needs, vacation needs, any kind of personal thing. It is not going to help you in the long run, particularly if you are going to stay in a geographical area to practice. Don't be the one who gets the reputation of being a jerk. Not only will your colleagues in the bar know about it, we talk among ourselves about the people who appear in our courts. And you want us to say good things about you.
All right, I'll come back to George Ellison.
Yeah, there's a business school professor at USC named Lawrence Peters who developed what's called the Peters Principle. The Peters Principle states that we're all promoted to the level of our incompetence. You think of a really inspirational classroom teacher. She gets promoted to dean, and she's no good as an administrator. Or you think of a kind of guy you'd happily follow into battle in the Army. He's just a leader of men and women. You put him in front of a congressional committee to testify about the budget, that's not something he's ready to handle at all. There's some of the same thing about who gets to be judges. you take a really good trial lawyer and make her a judge. That doesn't always work. There are different sets of skills, very different. And the judicial temperament may be foremost among them. And on the state side, it's also an issue. You may be a really good stump politician. You may know how to raise money for your campaigns, but do you make the transition easily to being a judge? It's an issue that hadn't gotten enough attention. People say judges don't get paid enough to attract the really great lawyers from the large law firms in big cities. Well, do we want them as judges? Who says we want those people?
Very good. Judge Rosenthal.
If I could just sort of segue from your question to a
Please,
related
bring us back.
question. Judges are constantly told that we are nothing more than politicians in robes, that our judgments are often a reflection of our political biases or beliefs, our personal preferences, and that we are helpless in the face of the pressure of our own internal belief as to what a given result in a given case ought to be. And I want to push back really hard on that. We are all up here, and I think throughout the judiciary, state and federal, by and large, the vast majority, conscientious judges who understand that we are there to decide not what we personally would prefer, but what we think is the right result given the facts and the law. Common sense and good judgment are a part of it. A personal belief that we would happily and properly exercise in the ballot box is not what we are about at all. And I just want you to know that we are all committed to being that kind of judge.
Judge Shockley.
Oh, I'd like to speak to the issue of the pressure of rulings or sitting on a state bench where you have to rely on many times the lawyers who provide the bulk of contributions to a campaign. My campaign treasurer for 2 contested races, Steve Schuett, said that on occasion he would get a call from an out-of-town lawyer asking him to be local counsel. That's what it's called, local counsel. Because they had a case in my court. And so what he told me that he told them was, look, I'll take it, but it's not going to make a difference to her that I'm local counsel. That's why I supported her. So I just feel like, there is that perception that the federales are above being affected potentially because of one thing or the other in a ruling. I mean, but more so on the state side. But I can tell you that there are judges on the state bench who are hardworking and honest as the day is long, just like the people on the federal bench. And I speak from both things. Now, the other thing is some really wonderful advice I got from Douglas Tinker, who was a very prominent criminal defense attorney from Corpus Christi who practiced statewide in state court and federal court, and who was actually one of the first people who encouraged me to apply for a federal judgeship. And I was very, flattered, but at the same time mystified. Why? Because there were a lot of my state district judge colleagues who had much longer tenure than I did on the state bench, because I had been a county court of law judge since 1985. But be that as it may, he gave me some great advice, talking about good judges and bad judges. He said, don't argue with the lawyers, just rule. And I've always kept him sitting on my shoulder during trials and hearings to remind me that it's not what I say that's important, it's what they say and what the record's going to say about their arguments, so that I would not get into this argument with lawyers and try to defend or explain my ruling. He said, just don't argue with the lawyers, just rule. And that's what I tried to do the entire time that I was a judge. Thank you.
I'll come to Judge Bray in a minute. If anyone has any questions, start putting them together in your head. I'll go to the students in a bit. But Judge Bray, same question to you. you know, what makes a good judge or a bad judge? What makes a good lawyer or a bad lawyer, right? What are the things that you might advise our students to think about as they go into to this brave new world?
Well, during this conversation, I remembered a question that actually Judge Rosenthal asked me during my interview to get this spot that I have now. She said, what have you learned as a lawyer that you think would make you a good judge? And the background, so I think there are qualities about lawyers and people that make good lawyers and good judges. And there are people, so just the background, think about it. My practice was to represent people accused of oftentimes pretty heinous crimes, whose families were upset, whose friends were upset, the victims were upset. The opposing counsel was maybe sometimes very motivated to get a particular result. And so I spent a lot of time just calming the waters. Now, whether I'm, doing that as well as I would hope I could as a judge, it takes practice. But there are people who can bring other people together. There are people who can just take the temperature down, from boiling to something lukewarm, and just have a conversation and just ask the right questions at the right time. Don't talk when you're supposed to be listening. I have a Post-it note on my bench that says, wait, W-A-I-T, why am I talking? So just be quiet and let the other person talk. And you end up, it's a good lawyering technique, especially if you're in a conference room, whatever, taking a deposition, looking at materials, talking to a witness, whatever you're doing. Just good judges, I think, they just bring a certain calm to the room. And all the judges here are that. And definitely my judge who I clerked for, who I never can say enough about, Judge Lake, is the exemplification of that. No matter how boiling the room is, he has an ability to bring it down, to talk about the law, to talk about the facts, rule, and move on. And I think if you can learn to do that, you'll be a better person, a better lawyer, better judge if you become one.
All right, we're almost at time. Questions from the students? Please raise your hand.
It was discussed clerkships here in the United States, or what was your anecdotes or thoughts on something equivalent but outside in different legal systems and applying it for a future career here in the U.S.?
I don't know the details, but I certainly know of law students who have gone on after graduation to clerk in other countries, and it's been a wonderful experience. I think there are formal programs that can make those kinds of connections, but it will take more research to find out about those than it does about, there's a wealth of information readily available about judges in this country and clerkship opportunities in this country. You're going to have to dig more to find out how to take advantage of similar opportunities in other countries. But I would absolutely do it if you can, particularly if you have an interest in practicing in international law or doing various kinds of public interest human rights law that might involve the law of other countries.
Very good. Other questions? Yes. And just loud so we can hear you, please.
Okay. Hi. I'm not a student. I actually work in the Career Resource Center, but I do work with our students who are interested in interning and clerking from courts. One of the things, I stepped out, so I apologize if y'all did talk about this, but if y'all have not had a chance to talk about judicial internships and the importance of those, do you mind sharing how you selected your interns and whether or not you chose your clerks who had interned before?
Who wants to talk?
Well, I would just say that I look at internships, rightly or wrongly, as a way to give somebody a chance, a way to give somebody, you know, a shot. And so there are some internship programs where the school sort of selects for me, and I just like that because, you know, the clerkship, I need that work. I need you to do that, and I can't get along without you. The intern is a little bit more symbiotic. It's just you meet me, I meet you, and, you know, maybe I'm not as worried about high grades and all of those things. I just want to give somebody a shot who might not otherwise have one. And there are, I know this school participates in a couple different programs, U of H, you know, all of them do, and you can sort of get your name in a hat, and I don't know that you all could intern if you wanted to, I'm pretty sure.
Especially internships during the semester, they're less competitive than summer internships because you only have the UH and TSU schools to compete with. Anyone else want to add to that one?
Oh, the only thing about that is, yes, there's great opportunity. A lot of judges give the interns the same kind of work that they give their law clerks, maybe just a little more discrete problems so that you can do it in lesser time. Most judges want interns who can commit at least 20 hours a week. So be prepared to be working really hard in a semester in which you're going to be an intern on top of your regular classwork.
Okay, other questions?
Oh, come on, guys.
Yes, in the back.
You all talked a little bit about controlling a courtroom. I just want to know what controlling a courtroom means to you all.
Good question. Who wants to do that one?
It sounds like you're.
Since I mentioned it, it's, well, for me, you know, because I guess I was in a courtroom a great deal before I went on the bench. Sometimes it's possible for a lawyer to just get, you know, too verbose, you know, spending too much time on something, or maybe repeating themselves, or God forbid, and that's something that, you know, I put a stop to right away. In any way deprecate opposing counsel or condescend, certainly not to the court. They weren't condescending, but I did have one situation where I was put in a very difficult situation that I'll tell you about in a second. But the bottom line is controlling a courtroom or managing a courtroom is making sure that everybody gets a chance to speak, finish their argument, but at least give them a time. Otherwise, you know, they'll take too long. But just, and not allow someone else to take control. And the instance that I wanted to share with you was, I was a newly minted county court at law judge, and I was having a conference in Chambers, and this older lawyer, you know, one of the silk stocking firm lawyers from Corpus Christi, small potatoes compared to Houston, but still, you know, big dogs in Corpus Christi. And whether it's because I was a woman, or I was young, or I was a, you know, person of color, he just told me exactly how things were going to be. Mm. And so out of politeness, I let him finish his spiel. And then I just looked at him and said, no, sir, this is how it's going to be. So it's that, I mean, like I said, you just have to make sure that everybody gets a fair shot at their argument, not letting one person just take over. And be polite at the same time, but firm.
Very good. Another question. Yes.
Are there any classes that y'all would recommend a student to take for either preparing for an internship or for a clerkship, like classes that y'all find are particularly helpful to the clerks that you hire?
In federal court clerkships, federal courts, it's a good one. Procedure, civil and criminal, lots of procedure, and any course that will let you write and get feedback on the writing. Doesn't really matter what the subject area is, but good writing classes are really helpful. In terms of substantive subject areas, we do a lot of employment cases. That's always very helpful. And others?
And for the benefit of our legal writing professors, what's the best way our kids can learn to write better? Because that's such an important skill.
read and write.
I think a lot of times people write without thinking through how they're going to organize. And, you know, I know it sounds like you're in 3rd or 4th grade writing your first essay or something, but outlining is not a bad idea. And the more complicated the subject matter is, a good outline can't be beat.
Very good. Other question? I saw a hand.
I was
over
just
there.
going to say on that, you know, you can sign up, for example, for the Supreme Court opinions and the Fifth Circuit opinions and get those just popped into your email box. I'm not suggesting that as students you have many hours a day to read all of them, but you can just see what it's about and kind of get a feeling for how the judges are writing and start to get a feeling for which judge's writing you like and why. And there's nothing wrong with emulating good writing or recognizing bad writing in terms of your own.
Well, 1 out of 10 of civil cases filed in federal courts, 1 out of 10 system-wide, is labor or employment related. It's a strikingly high number. And you need to take labor and employment law in its broadest sense, not just union or Title VII, but the Equal Pay Act, the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act. You need to know that field well. A much smaller percentage of cases consists of intellectual property issues, but they're very time-consuming cases. So it's a small part of the docket, but a very large portion of the amount of work that judges and clerks do. And you should have some background in intellectual property, at least know the vocabulary, what a Markman hearing is. And also, I do believe that you learn most from a good teacher, so you want to shape your choices around that.
I think there's one more question somewhere over there. Yes, go ahead.
I wanted to ask if you think that a judicial temperament is something that you're born with or something you can develop, because I know a lot of us are probably pretty like fiery or strong opinions or, you know, and so like, do you think that's something that you have to develop? Judicial temperament,
Nature or nurture?
Yeah, the question, if you couldn't hear it. Judicial temperament, nurture or nature? Are you born with it? Okay, who among you would like to answer that question? The 10-year-old judge or the 12-year-old judge?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, sometimes you don't have to do anything because you've got lawyers, good lawyers on both sides, and you've got an interesting problem and interesting questions, and it's just wonderful to sit there and listen to them present a case. Or you're at trial and you've got a really good expert on the stand, but you've got a really good lawyer cross-examining that expert. I mean, a lot of times, you know, I'll slip one of my law clerks a note to call the other law clerk to come in and watch this cross-examination and say, because this guy is really good, and he's got a tough witness, and he's really doing it well. But other times, you know, things degenerate. Probably the worst thing we see frequently, I would say, is when lawyers, instead of arguing to the bench, end up arguing with each other. You know, and it was like, okay, why am I even here if you two guys can take this out in the hallway and I'll go to the next case? But I think it's some of it's experience, and so there's a little bit of nurture there that you learn as you go along. You know, and we all learn things as we get older, hopefully, you know, like, well, I'll never do that again, you know, that type of thing.
What's that?
Some of it's just temperament, just your natural, and we're all different. I mean, you've got 5 of us up here, and we have 5 different personalities. And as a lawyer, you've got to realize that, because if you're in my court, some things might be overlooked, but if you're in somebody else's court, they might jump down your throat at it. So it's a little bit of both.
All right. I think we are at time, so thank you very much to our judges. Thank you. And Lunch will be served in the atrium. Please talk to the judges, talk to their lovely law clerks. This is your time. Thank you so much.
Great.
Yes, that was wonderful. Well, Chair, I like hearing about your background.